I'm super excited for our guest next. It's Keith Berns. Keith has an incredible amount of experience, and it's really cool because he not only runs his own farm operating 2,000 acres in south central Nebraska, but he also is a co-owner of Green Cover Seeds. And so the combination of working with, I would assume, thousands of different producers at this point, developing cover mixes and hearing feedback from them, combined with his direct experience on his own operation, is really just a combination of experience that is hard to replicate. So there's a lot to learn here, and I hope that you enjoy it. With that, let's all just again welcome Keith Berns to the stage.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. It's good to be back. I think I was at this conference back in 2019, and it's always good to be back in South Dakota and to speak to such a great group of people. So just a little bit of background to follow up on what he said there. We are in south central Nebraska. We're about 20 miles from the Kansas border, just straight down Highway 281. We've been no-tilling there for over 30 years. We're about half dry land and half irrigated on our ground there and growing a lot of corn and beans, but then also trying to grow cover crops for seed production wherever and whenever we can. We started down the cover crop path back about 15 years ago. We started Green Cover Seed in 2019 in response to some work that we had seen done by some guys from Brazil, and then Jay and Gabe from North Dakota. And then we started doing it on our own farm, and we saw how well it was working, and so we decided that we would try to start this business. So our mission statement, what we try to do at Green Cover, is we help people regenerate, steward, and share God's creation for future generations. And it's opened up a lot of cool opportunities for us. So one of the things that we've been able to have the fortune to do is we have people call us and say, hey, would you be part of this project or part of this, that, or the other thing? So the Soil Health Institute a number of years ago, they were making this documentary. If you've never seen this, I would encourage you to write this down. It's livingsoilfilm.com. It's completely free. You can watch it off their website. You can watch it off YouTube. I think it's got like 5 million views now. But it's about a 60-minute long documentary on soil health. We were fortunate enough to be part of it. But it's a really, really well done documentary on soil health. And so when they called us up, we said, sure, yeah, that sounds like fun. We'd be happy to do that. So I just wanted to share one little clip with you here. So they sent out this professional film crew. You know, they had all these fancy cameras. They had this big drone. And they wanted us to take the tractor out to the field because they wanted to show us drilling cover crops at the same time we were harvesting. So this beautiful day in October, we went and hooked up the air seeder, and I jumped in this big four-wheel drive tractor and was taking off down the road thinking, man, this is going to be great. You know, we're going to be famous. We're going to be in a movie. You know, you know how it is when you get a little too big for your britches and God says, you just need to come down a peg or two? Well, that kind of brought me down a peg or two. I turned around and I saw that thing just drifting off, and I saw that drone hovering right above it thinking, this is going to be good. And I show that because if you're a farmer, you've done something stupid like that too. You just don't have it captured on high definition drone footage. It is not in the film. If they had a bloopers reel, it would for sure be. But if you watch the movie, here's kind of just a funny little part. If you watch the movie, there's a little clip in there when we finally got this hooked back up and took it back to the shop, and we were fixing all the hoses and all the wires and everything else that didn't disconnect like they were supposed to. There's a little clip of it, and I'm looking right down at the hitch and the hitch pin. So if you know what you're looking for, it's a little bit of a funny part there. Well, anyway, I'm not here to share funny videos, although that's a great way to start. But 2025 is just beginning, folks. And, you know, as I was thinking about this, we have so much to be thankful for. As Americans, as farmers, as ranchers, we just have so much to be thankful for. You know, one of the things I'm really thankful for, a lot of these were brought home to me because I went with a group from our church to Honduras. We were doing some missions work kind of right in the middle here, right north of Comayagua. And it just brought home how much we have to be thankful for. Now, I'm thankful for good coffee because the place we were at, this is our friend Hobe, and he grows coffee, regeneratively grown coffee, and it was delicious. It was great coffee. But I became very thankful for flat ground to build on because there in the mountains of Honduras, there's no flat ground. You had to create your own flat ground. So I'm building a number of different things right now, so we're very thankful for that. Very thankful for skid steers because this is what I use to do my building projects. This is what a Honduran skid steer looks like. Here it is with a different attachment. But we have so much here to be thankful for. But no matter where you're at, whether it's here in the States or in Honduras, you can be thankful for the friends and teammates. We had a great group, and we got a lot done. And we took something that looked like this. We were building them a church building, so something that looked like that. And with lots of sweat equity, we made something that looked like this. And here's kind of how it went. So everything was done by hand. And, we had 8 people here from Nebraska and Kansas, and then they had about 8 good workers from Honduras, and we're able to do something like that. But you can see how much of a gap there is there. So just the slope on just that much area was about 4 or 5 feet. So lots of work to be done there. But another thing that I really noticed, because as we toured around their farm, Hobe was like, yeah, we'd like to do more cover crops. We'd like to do biology. We'd like to do all this. They just can't find it. They don't have access to seed. They don't have access to the tools and the education. And so we're very fortunate here that we have access to all these tools, all these methods of making these tools, and then great events like this. Things like this don't exist all around the world, like this conference that we're at right now. So we can all be very thankful for that. And access to seed as well. So we're trying to figure out how to ship cover crop seed down to Honduras and then backhaul coffee back out of there, because I think that would be pretty fun. And he said he's got a cousin that he drives a truck from Honduras. He drives it all the way up to the States, and he'll get stuff and take it all the way back. And we said, well, with the cartels, isn't that a problem? Because you got to go all the way through Mexico. He says, no, it's just like a toll road system. You just stop at the beginning of every cartel territory, you pay them a bribe, you get a password, and that will get you through to the next one, and then you stop and pay another bribe. So who knows? We may be importing coffee and shipping cover crop seed down there one of these times. But you would think that with all of this access to equipment and technology and seed and education that we have, that the cover crop adoption rate should be really high here in the United States. But is it? Where is it really at? I just wanted to share a little bit of information here with you. This is from the Census of Agriculture, the last one they did that got published in 2022. So they're saying we have about 18 million acres of cover crops across the United States. And that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. It's about a 75% increase over 2012 and 17% over the last 5 years. But folks, it's less than 6%. It's less than 6% of the cropped acres in the United States have a cover crop on them. And this is a map of the United States. You can kind of pick out where you're at. The darker the color, the more the cover crop adoption is. So if we look in our area here, we've got a lot of work to do. There's a lot higher concentrations over here because they've spent a lot of money putting cover crops in to protect the Chesapeake Bay. So here's the top states, and I don't want to offend anybody if you're from Texas, but I just hate seeing Texas first and stuff. I know that they're the biggest and do a lot of things, but so Nebraska's down here, number 4. This is in millions of acres. So Texas is doing about 1.5 million acres of cover crops right now. Nebraska is doing just under 1 million acres. But South Dakota, where are you? Where are you on the list? All the way down here at number 23. Now, I have a theory on that. I don't think that's completely true. I think that South Dakota farmers just aren't as willing to share their information with the U.S. Census is probably part of it, because I don't really think you're that far down the list. But regardless of where we're at, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of ground to cover, if you will, because only 5.7% of our acres have a cover crop on them, and not very many more have really true regenerative soil health practices being applied. So we can do better. We can do better. We must do better for these future generations. Remember, our mission statement was to regenerate God's creation for the future generations. And I know, in speaking with farmers all across the country, I know that is a huge passion for all of us, is to leave our land better for the next generation than what we found it. And we all want to do that. So why aren't we having more done? How do we do that? How do we get an increased adoption rate of soil health practices and cover crops? Well, like James Carville said back many years ago, it's the economy, stupid. And rather, it's really the economics, because I think that farmers will adopt these practices if they truly understand the economic benefits of soil health and cover crops. And so that's kind of a long introduction into what I want to talk about, because I want to talk about some of the economics of implementing some of these practices. Because once we understand how they work economically, it's much, much easier for us to implement them. It's much easier to convince our landlord or our father or our brother or whoever else is in our operation, whoever the other decision makers are. It's easier to convince them that, hey, we at least need to try this. We need to try this because here's what it can do. And so there's no better economics than free stuff. You know, farmers love free stuff. I mean, look at the hats and the coats you guys are wearing. I bet you didn't pay for most of them. You know, they're free, right? You can go around here and pick up a bunch of free hats. Farmers love free stuff. And we have access to lots of free stuff. And so I've come up with this concept. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And so, you know, like a lot of people, I just made up a word. So I made up this word biograce. Because as I look at what we have to work with as farmers, it's biology, but it's given to us by God by grace. And so I call these the 7 free biograces for farmers. And so as I go through these, I want you to be thinking about, are you getting your free share? So true grace, something that's given truly by grace, it's free. Okay, and so these 7 things I'm going to talk about are going to fall into this category. They're free, you can't buy it. It's undeserved, you don't earn it. And it's unrestricted, meaning everybody has access. So if something is given to you by grace, it's these 3 things. So like God's free gift of eternal life through Jesus is true grace. It's free, it's undeserved, it's unrestricted, but it's not just limited to that. He's given us all these other things that I want to share with you because they are available to each one of us as farmers. So the 7 free biograces for farmers, are you getting your share? Number 1, solar energy. Solar energy is limitless and it's free. You can't buy it. You don't do anything to earn it, and it's unrestricted. Everybody has access to it. Plants are the best way. And I might even say it's almost the only way to capture, store, and convert it to something of value. Now, we can do solar panels and things like that, but from a farmer context, we have to have plants growing in order to take advantage of this free resource, unlimited resource. And so you all know photosynthesis. You've all learned this probably in junior high. Photosynthesis, we're taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, we're adding water to it, we're using the energy of the sun, we're using the chlorophyll cells in a green plant, and it's creating glucose, C6H12O6. That's this glucose molecule right here. Very, very important. And the byproduct is oxygen. Oxygen is a byproduct of this. And so this glucose molecule becomes the foundation for everything because the plant does not leave it as glucose, it converts it to all of these other things. So these are all glucose derivatives. So you got starch, sucrose, cellulose, right on down the list. All of these, all the way down to these secondary metabolites. But I want you to notice that second column, the function. This is what these things do: energy storage, transport, structural rigidity, protective layers, growth regulation, genetic material. All of these plant functions are coming because that plant is able to make that glucose molecule from that photosynthetic process, and then it changes it into all of these other things that it needs for every single thing it needs to grow, to survive, and to thrive, and to be productive for us. So really, as farmers, we're harvesting sunlight. So we got to get that energy into our soils. If you aren't getting the maximum amount of sunlight into your soils, you are missing out. So energy in equals work done equals functions performed. Remember all these different functions? Some of those, if they don't happen correctly, you will have very poor yields. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes we don't have very much defense, and we have very sick plants. Sometimes we don't have very much structural integrity, and our crops fall down. So a lot of the issues and the problems that we have when we grow crops are because we don't have the plant functioning like it was designed to do. And the reason it's not functioning properly is because it's not getting enough energy into the system to do that. So here's what it looks like. This is from David Purdy. He's a guy I met online. He's actually from the UK, but he sent me these slides that I thought were really interesting. But it's just showing that energy flow, and it's sunlight that's turned into carbon energy. It flows into the soil, and then it grows these things, and then it comes back out with all of these functions and all of these products. And actually, like this drawing even better, because he's showing the earth, the soil, as a battery that is storing the energy that our solar collectors, which are these plants, are collecting, and we store that in the soil, and then that energy is used for those plants to do all of those functions. And the bigger your battery, the more power you have. The bigger your battery, the more functions you can drive, the more plants you can grow, the more productive you'll be. And so if we start thinking about it in that way, that we have to get energy into the system in order to get functions performed, we need to maximize our sunlight. And so in our farming operations, many of us, not all, but many of us are right here. We're in a corn-soybean rotation. Or as Dwayne Beck would say, an oscillation. It's not really a rotation if you're only doing two things. You're going back and forth. But this is less than 50% efficient at capturing solar energy. It's very efficient when it's fully grown, it's fully canopied, and we're capturing all that. But that's not for that long a period of time throughout the year. So we're missing out on a lot of sunlight. We're missing out on a lot of energy that we need to drive into our soil. And so we need to put a cover crop in. And we can graze that. We can take income off that by grazing it, but we need to fill that gap. And if you're growing wheat, it's even worse. You harvest your wheat, the wheat's done using solar energy in July. We don't plant our next crop till the next May. We've got 10 months, and it's the long months. It's months with lots of sunshine, and it's just hitting the bare ground. And so again, we need to put a cover crop in so we can capture that solar energy, put it into our soil, and turn it into something of value. So when you leave your fields like this with nothing planted, it's just simply a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity to put that energy into the soil so that you can get that back out later as healthy, functioning plants. Okay, number 2, carbon is not a problem. Carbon is not a problem. It's free food for both plants and biology. Carbon, it's free. We didn't earn it. We don't deserve it. And it's unrestricted. We all have access to it. And not only is it free, but someday, and I'll talk about this in just a second, we may get paid to actually take it out of the atmosphere. And so again, photosynthesis, this is the carbon part. We're pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting it into the soil. And so here's how it works. Plants are photosynthesizing. It's making that glucose molecule. It's turning that glucose into all of those other compounds. But as much as 50% of all of those photosynthetic compounds that are being made, as much as 50% is not being used by the plant for its growth. It's leaked out into the root system for the biology to consume. And that's what we see here. The plant is making these carbon payments. The biology is taking those, and then they have to deliver something back, because these plants are pretty smart. And they know if they're not getting a return on their investment, they're going to stop putting the carbon into the soil. So here's some really cool pictures from our friend Jimmy Emmons. Many of you know Jimmy. from Oklahoma, great farmer, rancher down there. So Jimmy did a cover crop. He planted some cereal rye a few years back, and he had a field day out there. And so they were out in the field day, and they were digging this up. And this rye was planted after he'd harvested wheat, and it was kind of early fall, late fall when they did this field day. And so the rye was probably maybe 10 inches tall. It wasn't huge, but it was actively growing. And you can see he had a lot of biological activity, because look at how that soil is just clinging to the roots, those great dreadlocks. It's a great sign of soil health. Well, he started digging up, and he's got a little thing on his iPhone. It's called a Proscope. He puts it right over the camera, and he can magnify things. And so he saw this really interesting thing. And so what he did is he dug up the soil. It broke apart right at a worm burrow or a worm channel. And so that's what you see right here. You see this. This is a cereal rye root, and it's going sideways through this worm channel. So it's not actually growing in the soil. It's growing in the airspace of that worm burrow. And so he thought, well, that's a pretty cool picture. Look at all those little root hairs coming off there. You don't typically see that, because if you pull that out, all those root hairs fall off. And if you do a really good job of washing it off, all of those little carbon droplets fall off. So here's what he saw. When he magnified it even more, he saw all these little droplets of liquid on these root hairs. And that is the liquid carbon root exudates, that plant, 10-inch tall plant. It is pumping out carbon into the soil to feed the biology that's there. And now this plant was extremely healthy. There was no fertility put on. He didn't need any herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. Even if he would have taken it out, and I think he grazed this out, but even if he would have taken it out for a cash crop the next year, with all of that carbon, with all of that biology, it was a very, very healthy ecosystem. And so carbon is such a key part of making the system work. It's what all of this biology consumes. It's what they have to eat. And if you can feed them, that biology will do great work for you. So if you want a deeper dive into that, I've got a talk called Carbonics. You can get on our YouTube channel, Green Cover YouTube channel. You can get a lot more information and in depth on that. And I wanted to throw this in there. I added this kind of last minute. I don't know where I feel. I don't know how I feel about carbon programs yet. We're not in one. I'm certainly not opposed to it. I know lots of people that are. But I think the opportunity is going to be out there for us to get paid for putting carbon into the soil. Just be careful about what program you get into. Make sure you understand all of the details. Make sure you understand all of the requirements. But here's what just really irks me when I saw this, right over here. It says, solar energy developer secures $415 million to power the world's largest direct air capture plant. Well, we already have direct air capture plants. They're called green growing plants. And they're paying this solar company $415 million to basically build a machine that sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere, and to spend even more money than to pump it down into a mine shaft. Stupidest thing I've ever heard. We have the answer. We just need to step up and let people know. All right, number 3. So we have solar energy, we have carbon. Number 3, nitrogen. Nitrogen is free and abundant. You know, when you think of things that are things you don't have to pay for, things that you don't really earn, things that are unrestricted, we don't often think about nitrogen, because as an industry, we spend, well, it was $4.8 billion in 2021. So this year it was over $5 billion just in the U.S. on nitrogen fertilizer. That's not my definition of free. But the reason that we can say that it's free is this right here. So CO2, the carbon that we're pulling out through photosynthesis, it's right here. It's about 0.04% of the atmosphere. And if you ever get in a conversation with somebody who wants to tell you that carbon is ruining the planet and global warming this and that, and I'm not saying some of that's not happening, but if they're blaming it on carbon, ask them how much carbon is in the atmosphere. Ask them. They probably won't know. It's 0.04% of the atmosphere is CO2. Yet plants are so good and they're so efficient at pulling that out that we can grow all of these crops With that tiny little fraction, 4/100ths of 1%, plants are very, very good at taking that carbon out of the CO2. But look at, here's our pie chart. The rest of this, 78% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. So above every acre of crop ground that you farm or that you own or that you rent, there's 30,000 tons of nitrogen. 30,000 tons of nitrogen above every acre of crop ground, but yet we're spending $5 billion a year to put it out as fertilizer. And here's the reason. It's because nitrogen in the atmosphere is held as dinitrogen. It's two nitrogen molecules. They're bonded to each other, and they're completely inert to everything else. So we can breathe it in, no problem. You breathe it right back out. But if anybody in here, and most of us have, ever had a whiff of anhydrous or some sort of ammonia product, you know what that nitrogen can do to your body. It can kill you. So it's a good thing that the nitrogen in the atmosphere is dinitrogen, or we'd all be dead. But just like we don't react to it at all in our own bodies or our own lungs, plants can't do anything with it either. And so, in our wisdom, we figured out how to break that nitrogen molecule. We can build these big factories. We can split the nitrogen molecule. We can put it into other forms. We add hydrogen and oxygen, and we can make ammonium and ammonia and urea and all these other things. We can build and make these, but it's expensive because it takes a lot of energy to do that. So when you're paying for nitrogen, don't think that you're buying nitrogen because you've got 30,000 tons over every acre. You're buying the energy that it takes to make that nitrogen available. Now, what it takes us $5 billion to do, though, God has provided the mechanisms to do this for absolutely free. And our prairie soils have been built over generations, over centuries with this process. So rhizobia bacteria, they will form these nodules on legume plants. They will take that atmospheric nitrogen, they will break it apart inside these nodules attached to your plant roots. They break it apart, they combine it with hydrogen and oxygen, they put it into a form that the plants can use, and then the plants use it in exchange for feeding these guys the carbon root exudates. Because as cool as rhizobia are, and they can break that nitrogen bond, they can't survive on that. They can't eat that. That doesn't help them grow. They need carbon, and they have no ability to make carbon themselves. They're dependent upon the plant to feed them. The plant's dependent upon the rhizobia to give them the nitrogen. It's a beautiful system. It's a beautiful system, and we can grow great crops with no nitrogen, these great legume crops. But it's not just legumes. There's all these other organisms. So we got things like azospirillum and zotobacter and bacillus and cyanobacteria, and the list goes on of these organisms that do the same thing rhizobia do. They can make this atmospheric nitrogen available to our crops, but they do it for all plants, not just legumes. And so we think, well, why aren't we just dumping bucket loads of zotobacter out on our corn and not putting any nitrogen out? That's a great question. Rhizobia build these colonies. There's billions and trillions of bacteria that make up these colonies. And if you're growing 70 bushel soybeans, it's taking 350 to 400 units of nitrogen to grow that. And these guys can make that. They can make 400 units of nitrogen in 60 days. That is impressive. That's a lot because they're doing it in these colonies. These guys are single-celled organisms. They don't build these colonies. They're not nearly as productive. And so you'll get 30, 40, maybe 50 units of nitrogen per year in your system with these. So is that enough to grow a 200 bushel corn crop? No, not by itself. But what does 30, 40, 50 units of nitrogen do for a forage crop? What does it do for a cover crop? What does it do for a crop where you're grazing and you're cycling those nutrients? It does a lot. And so this is part of the system. It's not the only part, but we need to figure out how to get more biology involved to make these work. Now the thing is if we have too much soil applied nitrogen, if we're putting nitrogen out there, hey, plants are smart and they're lazy. They're going to take the easiest path. So if you're putting nitrogen out there, it does not incentivize your plants to put the carbon food out to get these guys activated. So it's very, very difficult. It's tricky to not put too much nitrogen on to where you depress these, but you have to have enough so you don't hurt your crop. But that's how we get nitrogen into our system, and that's why we can say it's free and abundant. It's all around us, it's all over us. We just have to get it in the right form for our plants. A couple of really good webinars. We did a webinar with Dr. James White. If you've never heard him talk about the rhizophagy cycle, fascinating work about how some of this works. Again, this is on our YouTube channel. There's so much information. I want you, if you want to dig deeper, this is where you should go to do it. And then Dr. Christine Jones has an excellent webinar called The Nitrogen Solution, where she goes into much more detail. She's way smarter than I'll ever be, and she explains it so much better. So again, I would encourage you, I'd point you to those two if you want to take a deeper dive into that. Number 4, oxygen. Oxygen is freely available. Remember photosynthesis, it was a byproduct. And I said that we need to breathe it, which is true, but so do all of these little organisms. They have to breathe oxygen as well, and your plant roots need oxygen. So here's what happens as you're growing things. Oxygen diffuses out of the air spaces. So you got soil, and all these little spaces in your soil is filled with atmosphere, and it's about 15, 18% oxygen. And so we're pulling the oxygen out of that, but as your roots and as that biology are living and they're doing their thing, it gives off carbon dioxide. It's a cycle. And if that carbon dioxide can't get out of your soil and new oxygen get into your soil, bad things happen. Plants will stop growing. And so again, in this system here, as the energy goes down from sunlight, oxygen needs to move down as well. Plant roots will never grow deeper than where you can get oxygen into your soil. And so sometimes your limiting factor in growth, sometimes we think it's water, but it's not. It's oxygen. And it's not because there's not oxygen up here, it's because there's not oxygen down here, and the roots will never grow deeper than where the oxygen is. And so this doesn't happen if we have really compacted soils. Like you see there on the left, it's difficult to get the oxygen down, but if we have really good, highly aggregated through roots, through biology soil, we can get that down. And this is, again, from David Purdy, a really interesting slide. He says that plants can sense soil compaction. And a lot of times we think that the soil is compacted and it becomes a physical barrier that the roots can't grow through, but it's not always just a mechanical impedance, because he says compaction lowers the gas diffusion or that gas exchange. Ethylene accumulates. Ethylene is a gas that's put off by the plant growing, and it triggers a response that stops root growth. Ethylene is actually what makes fruit ripen, and that plant thinks it's mature because that ethylene can't get out of the soil, it accumulates, and the roots stop growing. And so sometimes compaction is not just a mechanical thing, sometimes it can be this hormonal thing. But the point is that oxygen is free, it's available. You need to get it as deep into your soil as you can. So you need to be thinking about how do we get our soils so they're better aerated. And it's these two things. It's plant roots and it's biology. And the best biology for this is going to be earthworms. And so if you go out and dig in your soil and you don't either find earthworms or find evidence of where the worms have been, because if it's hot and dry, you won't find them up high, but you'll be able to see where they were. If you don't have those, you probably aren't getting oxygen very deep into your soil. And a lot of times people will ask about soil testing, biological soil testing, and I ask them if they have earthworms. And if the answer is no, I don't really see any earthworms out there, don't waste your money on getting a biological soil test. You don't have much. But if you do see lots of good earthworm activity, then there's a number of good soil tests, biological tests out there that you can work with to see what you actually have going on. All right, so we've got solar energy, we've got carbon, we've got nitrogen, we've got oxygen, and number 5 in this list of biograces, things that are free, things that are undeserved or unearned, and things that are unlimited or unrestricted. Our soils are rich in minerals and plant nutrients. They're rich in these things. And if you look at the composition of soil, good soil is 45%, give or take a little bit, made up of minerals. Should be about 25 water, 25% air spaces, and then 5% organic matter. Now that's kind of an ideal soil. Of course, that's going to vary. But the point is that almost half of your soil is just minerals. And minerals are what plants need in order to grow. So they're getting the nitrogen and the carbon out of the air, but the rest of these things that plants need to grow, like phosphorus and potassium and calcium and magnesium and iron and manganese and boron and right on down the list, these are often things we spend a lot of money to put into our soil for the plants to grow. Your soil is made up of these things. That's the mineral portion of our soils. They're out there. And so if you do a soil test, and I've got an example here from our friends at Ward Labs, and I see they've got a booth back there, so you can go talk to them later about this test I'm going to show you. When we do a soil test, we send this in, and this particular test showed my nitrate. I got 35 parts per million of phosphorus. I got 436 of potassium. You can see my calcium, magnesium, sodium, and so on. All that is showing me, this is just a standard soil test, all this shows me is what's available to the plant. It's not showing me what's in my soil. It's showing me what can the plant see or what can the plant roots get. But if you really want to blow your mind, send in a soil sample and ask for this test. This is a total nutrient digest test, and Ward Labs runs it, and most of your major soil labs will run these. And you can ask them about this, but here they analyze 68 samples with this test across several Midwest soils, so this is kind of an average. But make a note, this is only from the top 6 inches. So in the top 6 inches of our soil, I have, and this is in pounds per acre, I have 878 pounds of phosphorus in the top 6 inches, 3,700 pounds of potassium, 8,600 pounds of calcium. Look at iron, 22,000 pounds of iron in the top 6 inches. And if my roots can grow down 4 feet deep, which we've got good soils, you've got good soils, and for many of you, 4 feet, 6 inches, well, that's times 8. I can take all these numbers times 8 in order to get how much phosphorus, potassium, calcium. Folks, you've got a lot of nutrients in your soils. You've got the nutrients and the minerals that you need to grow crops for thousands of years, but they're locked up in a form that your plants can't get to. They're not directly available to the plants. That's why they don't show up on a standard soil test. They have to go through the biology. That's how God designed the system in order for it to not get overloaded, just like the plants can't get the nitrogen directly. It goes through bugs or organisms. Same way with the minerals. Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be able to be regulated as well. The biology is what regulates it, and it makes it available. So I love this article that was in Scientific America a number of years ago. It says, mycorrhiza fungi run the largest mining operation in the world. And I love this because when you think of a mining operation, you think of this giant equipment, one tire the size of a house kind of a thing. And they're saying the largest mining operation in the world, if you don't have a pretty good microscope, you don't even see it happening. Because it's happening at microscopic scale, but it's happening all across the world, everywhere where plants are healthily growing. And here's how it works. So this picture right here from this article, this is a little piece of feldspar. So just think of it like a little grain of sand or a little clay particle. And you see these little brown channels that are cut up into that. Those are actually microscopic mine shafts. And the mycorrhiza, they exude the right enzymes, the right chemicals, they cultivate the right type of bacteria. They actually dissolve that solid mineral. They dissolve it into a liquid form, and then they bring it back through their hyphal network, and they deliver it to the plant that is hosting them. So it's kind of a superpower. They can dissolve solid mineral and deliver it to their host plant. Here's what it looks like. This is arbuscular mycorrhiza. So the black things, you can kind of see one off to the side there. You kind of see some in there. It's very efficient because part of this fungus is growing inside the plant root. Those arbuscles are inside the plant root. And then the hyphae, those little strands, go out into the soil. And that's what's making those mine shafts. That's what's tunneling. There's such fine fine filaments. It can actually tunnel inside of those little soil particles, pull those minerals out, and deliver it straight to the plant roots. It's a highway straight to the plant roots. And in exchange, again, the plant doesn't get this for free, because as cool as dissolving solid mineral is, these mycorrhizal fungi can't exist on the minerals. They have to have the carbon. And they can't get that themselves. The plant has to supply that. And so again, we see this cool symbiotic relationship with the plant providing the carbon, the organisms are doing the work, everybody's happy, everybody wins. Another picture of what that looks like under highly magnified. Again, you can see the arbuscles growing inside the plant root, and then these fungal hyphae come out into the soil, and that's what's pulling that in. And it can also bring in water. When things are dry, the plant can get these guys to bring water in. So it's essentially, it's a huge extension of your root system. And if you really want to make a drought-tolerant hybrid, you can mess with the genetics and stuff, that's great, but it's not going to be as powerful as getting these plants to associate and cultivate and magnify the amount of mycorrhizal fungi they have with them, because that's what's going to really extend your root system. So again, I keep going back to these webinars. Christine Jones, she has 4 webinars that we did with her. She's just an amazing scientist. She's retired now, so these are even more precious. But she has a great webinar on the phosphorus paradox and talks about this whole system of how we really don't need to be applying phosphorus if we have a good, active biological system, because the biology will make the phosphorus that's in our soils available to our plants. Number 6, water is given to all. Now, I didn't say that water is unlimited. Sometimes we have too much, sometimes we don't have enough. Rarely do we have just the right amount, right? As you know, we're typically not Goldilocks farmers. It's either too hot or too cold. It's hardly ever just right. But water is given to us by God. It's given by grace, and I'm talking about the rainfall, the precipitation. We can't buy it. You can't earn it, and it falls on our neighbor just like it does on us. And I know it's not consistent across the large area, but it's not different across the fence line typically. And so water is important because it is the second component of photosynthesis. It's CO2 plus H2O. If we don't have water, this doesn't happen. And so oftentimes when we see things wilting down and dying from drought, it's not just that they run out of water, they run out of food. They run out of energy, because without the water, photosynthesis can't happen. And then the carbon can't be put into the plant, can't be put into the roots, it can't be put into the soil. Everything suffers when that plant can't photosynthesize, and if it doesn't have water, it can't photosynthesize. Now, it's a little frustrating because water is in this big cycle, this big water cycle, and there's all of these things that control, these global things. You hear them talk about the temperature of the ocean and the air currents and all this and that. We have no control over almost all of that. But we do have control over one part of this water cycle, but too often we don't take advantage of it, and that's this part right here. We have almost complete control over the infiltration part of the water cycle. But sometimes we ignore that. Sometimes we don't understand how important that is. But when we see pictures like this, and this is again from Oklahoma, but I know that this has happened in Nebraska, I know it's happened in South Dakota, North Dakota. You've probably all seen pictures like this. But this is right across the road from each other. The field on the left is a farmer named Russ Jackson. Russ grows some cover crop seed for us. Russ is a really good farmer. And then he's got a neighbor that has the exact same soil type, literally right across the road, same slopes, same soils, different management systems. And so they got a big rain, and it was fortunate because the NRCS had been out and they had taken infiltration tests, because Russ, I think they had a field day out there. So they did infiltration tests about a month before this picture happened, and they knew exactly what the infiltration rate was. So here is the neighbor, conventional tillage, small grains. He's basically just wheat, No cover crops, no grazing. So this guy is a western Oklahoma, this is out in the western part of the state, western Oklahoma wheat farmer. Tillage, no diversity. When they tested his soil, it was 0.6 inches an hour. And they got 5.3 inches in an hour. So he got 16,507 gallons of water infiltrated into his soil out of this rainfall event. The rest of it is busy running down the bar ditch right here, running out to the drainage system. Russ, same situation, but look, he's got no-till. He's got crop rotation. He's growing multiple crops. He's got cover crops. He's got grazing. He's got animals that he grazes through that, and he's managing it all well. And when they tested his infiltration, 6 inches an hour, 10 times his neighbor. So how much did he get? Well, he got what we should all say we get when we get a rainfall. He got all of it. That's the only thing we should say when somebody says, how much rain did you get? I got all of it. He got 144,000 gallons of water infiltrated, no standing water, 5.3 inches in an hour. He took it all in because of the way that he managed his system. So he's taking advantage of that free gift of precipitation, and he's not wasting any of it. And it's not just getting it into the soil, but it's also, can we store it? And so when we have two different soils like this, one that's been poorly managed on the left, and you can see that it's very light colored. These are right, this is not from that same farm, but this is still right across the fence row comparisons. So the light colored soil, very low on carbon, 1.5% soil organic matter. It can store 1.75 inches per foot, and this would be in a silt loam soil. That's just from the tables that you can get online. So he can store 189,000 gallons of water in 4 feet of soil. Okay, well, that sounds like quite a bit. That's not bad. The neighbor, and in fact, actually, I think this is Dave Brandt's picture. So I think this is Dave and Brandt and a neighbor, 4.5% soil organic matter. And you can see the carbon in there. 4.75 inches of water stored per foot, because organic matter is the key to storing water. He can store 513,000 gallons of water in his 4 feet. Now, when the dry times come, and they will come for all of us, who's going to last the longest? That's pretty obvious, the guy that can store more water. So water, such a precious commodity, given to us by grace. We don't earn it. We don't deserve it. It's unrestricted in that it falls where it will, but you have to be ready to take it in, and you have to be ready to store it. And then number 7, soil biology makes the system bigger, faster, stronger, and more efficient. I've been talking about biology all the way through here, and how the carbon cycles, how the nitrogen cycles, the nutrients, they play such a key, important role in all of these functions. And I suspect, in looking at the agenda for the rest of this event, there's going to be a lot of talk about biology as you go to these sessions. As well there should be, because it's such an integral part of any system, any farming system. So we have to have the biology in the system in order to make it work. And so we've got, all these things, earthworms are incredibly important. The mycorrhiza fungi, we talked about them, the rhizobia and the key role that they play. And there's all of these others. Again, I'm not the smartest one to tell you about all these, but I've worked with a lot of smart people, and I've listened, and I've read, and I've watched a lot of things. And so it's just so incredibly important. And it's interesting because when we started no-tilling back in the late 80s, it was simply to conserve water. And when we started doing cover crops, it was mainly to, help protect the soil, to keep erosion down. We didn't really know or understand or think about soil biology 15 years ago. And it's not because the information wasn't there. We weren't paying attention. But as we were into this and as we learned, it became more and more evident how important that biology is. So this is our philosophy. We need the soil biology. All of these functions that I talked about, yeah, you can replace them with a jug, but it's not as good and it's way more expensive. So we need the biology to do as many functions as we can, and then supplement the biology what it can't do or isn't doing. So we need them So you seed them, and when I say you seed them, we may have to put some biology out there. Now, your soil has some of these biological organisms, and I'm talking about if you're coming from a conventional system, conventional tillage, low diversity, no rotation, those sorts of things, there will still be biology there. Even the worst soils, unless it's been, sterilized somehow, it's going to have biology. But it may take a while to build up the populations of the beneficial biology. So when you're first getting started, we like to jumpstart things by getting some sort of compost extract, and both bacterial and fungal. We want to see the rhizobia bacteria out there. We always add that to legumes. It's fairly cheap. All of these are relatively inexpensive, and it's good insurance policy to put those out there. Now, the one exception to that is the mycorrhiza inoculant. It's more expensive. You can't just brew these up in a vat like the bacteria. So it can cost a little bit more, but there's certainly times when you'd want to do that. So our philosophy is you need them, so you seed them, but here's the most important part. You have to feed them. Because it makes no sense to spend money putting biology into your soil just to let them starve because you have no green growing plant out there for 10 months. And in the 10 months from when you harvest wheat to when you plant corn the next year, much of your biology is either going to die off or it's going to go dormant because it can't survive without having those carbon root exudates from those green growing plants being put into the soil. So if you are going to focus on biology and you're going to put biology out there, or you know that you have biology and you want to keep it, you want to grow it, you have to feed them. Just like you feed your cattle, just like you feed any other form of livestock, you have to treat these things like living creatures, these living organisms that they are, and you have to have a plan in place to feed them. And that's where cover crops are hugely valuable. Remember the picture from Jimmy Emmons? All of those little droplets of carbon are feeding his biology. And even if your cover crop only gets 6, 8, 10 inches tall, from a biomass standpoint, you may think, golly, I don't know if that really did that much good. Because, I sprayed it out and now there's nothing left. Well, from that point of view, you may be right. You didn't grow as much biomass as you wanted. Maybe it didn't do as good a job with suppressing weeds because you didn't grow the big biomass that you were wanting. But what's it doing underground? What are the roots doing? How are you feeding and supporting and growing and propagating the biological community underground? You can't forget that. Even though you can't see them, you can't forget that. And so that's where even a cover crop that grows, for only, 45 days and doesn't get very tall, it can still keep your biology alive until the next crop starts growing. Because when you're growing your corn or your beans or your wheat, those are putting out root exudates, and that can help keep that biology alive. But what are you doing in between to keep them alive and keep them going? So again, lots more resources. Again, a Dr. Christine Jones video. If you can't tell, we're big fans of Dr. Jones. She has a great one. This is probably one of our most watched webinars, Secrets of the Soil Sociobiome. And if nothing else, just say sociobiome. It makes you sound smart. But it's a great watch, and she talks about how all of these communities work together within the soil. Then we also have a webinar with Dr. David Johnson. If you're interested in making some of your own compost, the Johnson-Su method, which he and his wife developed, easy to do. It's a relatively easy thing to do at home. If you're wanting to start some of this isn't a bad place to start. We've got a webinar where they kind of walk us through that process. Now, so those are the 7 biological graces that we have. But grace is not automatic. Grace is not automatic. You have to grasp it and accept it, and you have to implement it into your life. Just like the grace that God extends to us through Jesus, we have to accept that. These 7 graces that I just shared with you, you have to accept that. You have to implement that and integrate it into your systems. And that's what the rest of this conference is going to be about. I think every single speaker from here on out they're going to be hitting on one of these 7 things that I just shared with you. Some of these graces, those 7 free things, are going to be talked about, whether it's through the livestock or through no-till or through biology or whatever else. They're going to be addressed. And everybody else is going to be talking about how do we take advantage of that? How do we implement that? How do we put that into our own systems? Because it's not enough for it to be free and undeserved and unrestricted. If you don't do something to put it into your system, it just sits out there. It's like the sun shining on bare soil. It's a resource that's just being completely wasted. And so as you go through the rest of this conference, as you go to the breakout sessions, as you talk to people at your tables, which, by the way, is tremendous advice. You will learn so much by introducing yourself, sharing what you're doing, learning what other people are doing. Find out how they're implementing these graces into their system. The same thing may not work for you, but it might. And it might trigger an idea of how it could work. And I would encourage you, I would challenge you to go home and consider which of these 7 things that you need, that you want to work the hardest on this upcoming year to try to get more of into your system. And you can do multiple ones. They're not mutually exclusive, but really think about where is the low-hanging fruit for my operation. Is it just capturing more sunlight? Is it I really need to work on my infiltration? I really need to get more of the nutrients I have in my soil freed up so I don't have to spend as much on fertility. Can I cut my nitrogen use by 30% by implementing some of these biologicals? I don't know. I don't know what it is for you, but there's something there. There's something here. There's something within these 7 things that you can grasp and accept and implement and integrate into your system to make yourself much more profitable. We've got resources. We have our brand new soil health resource guide. In fact, if you take a good deep sniff, it'll still smell like ink because it may not be quite dry yet. Literally hot off the presses. Over here at our booth, you're welcome to grab one of those. I also have some copies of some of our past ones. This is the version 10 with a great looking Angus steer on it there. So you're welcome to take that. The new one is 96 pages and it's chock full of articles like Christine Jones and other experts in the field telling about different facets of what I just talked about. So you're welcome to any of those. I would welcome emails. You can call me if you want. I will probably respond faster to an email than I will a voicemail, but you're welcome to reach out to me if you have questions. If you want to challenge me on any of this, love to have that discussion. That's how we all learn. So yeah, write down my contact information. You're welcome to it. But thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking advantage of the opportunities that you have before you here to learn and to grow and to implement these graces into your own system. Thank you very much.